13 years after the great Old Mutual unbundling, it went all over the world buying up insurance companies and spent most of the last couple of years undoing all of that and doing now what it probably should have done in the first place, which is focus on doing business on the African continent. It's an African business. It's nearly 165 years old. It's been around the block. So why did it go off and make some very, very poor acquisitions? It's a history littered with bad decisions, isn't it? Mohale Ralebitso is the senior executive at Old Mutual. Give me a sense of the change of thinking, Mohale.
Well, I think before we get into the change of thinking, let's look at how the world has changed. Because you speak about 13 years ago and buying assets in the first world. The first world was the place to be. Everybody wanted to be offshore. And I think at that point in time, it possibly made sense to invest to strike the balance between the emerging and the developed markets. And I think Old Mutual wasn't alone in making acquisitions. There were a number of other players who did. And I think people fared differently with those strategies. And we've seen a number of South African players with mixed results. SAB has done it spectacularly well, others not so well. And
but one looks at those strategies and following the trends. Now Old Mutual is following the Africa trend. Who says it's the right trend?
Well, fortunately, this time around, we're not following the trend. We're following something which is pretty much innate to what Old Mutual has always been, which is a strong emerging market player. Our roots are in South Africa, and we're now listed on the London Stock Exchange. But what's never changed, I think, is Old Mutual's commitment to Africa, certainly the southern tip of it, as witnessed by our presence in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and so on and so on. So this is our knitting, if you will.
Okay, but this refocusing on the core, refocusing on the emerging market, because still 75-80% of Old Mutual's profits come from South Africa and the emerging market complex, be it some Latin American exposure or some Asian exposure as well. That's where the profits of Old Mutual come from. So this is capitalizing on the strengths. But one goes into the other parts of the African continent, you've got some of your competitors have got a head start.
Yes and no. We've been in Kenya, and perhaps people aren't very much aware. So in the eastern part of Africa, we have some experience being there. Our asset management business is the leading business in Kenya, although we're 8th overall in that particular environment. And one would have to be foolish not to be in Nigeria. The country is now stable. There's some predictability in terms of the principles of succession, and there's a concerted effort on the part of the government of the day to create stability, which is what we need to be able to invest in that environment. And with the size of the Nigerian population, for example, and the levels of penetration of the long-term saving and protection industry, we'd be silly not to be looking at Nigeria and leveraging our strengths coming out of South Africa.
Everybody you talk to, especially when it comes to consultants in the Africa expansion space, the consultants will tell you it's about demographics, it's about demographic change, it's about rapid growth in economies. But the clever consultants I talk to tell me it's going to take 15 to 20 years to make a return out of these markets. Are you as cynical as that?
No, I think it possibly won't take that long. But being 168 years old as a business, you develop some patience. And our horizon for planning is, 15, 20, 30 years and beyond, because the people who enable ultimately have to think about their lives in those kinds of chunks, if you will.
Where are the big growth opportunities on this continent?
Nigeria and West Africa. Ghana is doing phenomenally well, and it's one of the territories that we'll naturally want to look at, with Nigeria being our hub in that region. In East Africa, Kenya remains an attractive environment, although there's been some challenges. But again, it's one of those things where you have to ride out the cycles. Otherwise, if it were a walk in the park, everybody would be there. And we can't wait until those environments reach a perfect state in order to be active there. They present wonderful opportunities, and in fact, part of what we can be is a solution to fostering stability in those environments.
Let's talk about Zimbabwe then. Yes. Old Mutual stayed invested in Zimbabwe throughout an extended crisis. Has it facilitated change in Zimbabwe?
I think it has, because without Old Mutual, you have to ask what would have happened. Even remove Old Mutual from the equation. Without the players who've remained in Zimbabwe, here's Zimbabwe going through a transition. If everybody leaves, how is that a solution for bringing the country into stability? How is that a solution for looking after pensioners? Do we abandon our customers and say we'll see you later when the good times return? Certainly, I don't think we can do that.
Are you being rewarded for that loyalty to your customers there?
I think our our customers are rewarding us. If you look at the mix of business that we have in Zimbabwe, it's been a major case study for us in terms of how to do bank assurance. So we've learned how to play on both sides of the customer's balance sheet, but while remaining a viable long-term player, which is ultimately what we're in the game to be in. And Zimbabwe's taught us, I think, amazing lessons on how to scale up and to scale down a business in times of crisis. And that lesson is going to prove to be invaluable as we roll out in the rest of the continent.
Are there enough people with enough money, spare money, to save on the African continent outside of South Africa? Because South Africa is a tough enough environment to operate in, and we've got a pretty big expanding middle class that everybody wants a piece of, to say, you need to save for your retirement, come and save with us.
Go back to 1985 in South Africa, go back to the early 90s, and I think it would have been less certain if he'd said that South Africa is going to emerge as the strong player that it is on the continent now, and for that matter in global affairs. Yet here we are. The told thesis on South Africa would have said that South Africa is going to implode, in as much as nowadays we'll hear that this or the other country is going to implode. But if we focus on our knitting and say, where's the opportunity and how do we support the customers who are ultimately the citizens through whose action some of those countries are going to stabilize, there's a natural part for us to play, and we're going to continue to play.
Taking the long-term view, Mohale Ralebitso, who's a senior executive at Old Mutual.